if you think heavy weights is all you need to build muscle, you are wrong. Let's use an example. Even a person who uses one arm more than the other, and they're doing a movement where it's just continuous and repetitive, that arm will probably be their biggest arm. Now, it's not like they're lifting heavy weights, it's just that that arm is receiving more exercise. Even when you have surgery, a body part simply shrinks because you've stopped using it from doing something menial like washing yourself or getting dressed, simple stuff like that. Now that's not a heavy movement, and it actually keeps the tissue. So as soon as the arm or the leg or whatever it is that you've had operated on stops getting used, the area shrinks. How does it come back to normal size? Well, sometimes there may be a nerve-related problem that'll prevent this, and sometimes it just simply comes back from normal everyday use, getting back to work. When you're a competitive athlete and you've been lifting weights, then the ball game changes a little bit because you've actually enhanced the area by lifting weights, so it's going to carry more size than normal, and to get it back to that size, you would probably have to employ weights. Now, you have a choice of whether you can go heavy or you can go light, depending on what you believe. Now, there's different schools of thoughts. There was people like Dorian Yates who claimed that the best way and the only way that he could improve was to continuously get stronger. Now, it got to a point where he had a few severe injuries from doing that type of training, and I think, I'm not even sure if he actually admitted it, that towards the end he may have realised, or if he'd have had a coach, somebody who maybe could have explained to him that he didn't have to continue with the heavy movements, he possibly could have done time under tension or other intensity techniques, but he kept going with what had worked for him in the beginning, which was to continuously increase weights. Now, for a beginner to improve, if that beginner doesn't have good muscle control, they would need to increase their weight in order to progress. However, if that beginner was a person who had muscle control and actually knew how to flex their muscles and control their muscles and flick their pecs and do all sorts of muscle control tricks like that, well, then that person could probably build muscle significantly better than a person who didn't have muscle control. So then the person who has muscle control can actually control the muscle with contraction. So they are using a weight, but they're using that weight to actually contract the muscle more so than if they weren't holding that weight. Having said that, I've worked with exercise physiologists that showed me how to take a muscle to momentary muscle failure without using any weight at all. Yes, that is possible. Okay, so we're so ingrained with, you got to lift weights, it's got to be heavy. And, you know, the latest stuff that I've heard, which I've actually been hearing for years, is that, you know, to get that muscle to look hard, make the muscle hard, you've got to lift heavy. I can't quite agree with that, because why should it be that way? Okay, you've used 1,000 pounds on an exercise and that's what you feel it needs in order to get that graininess. Is it really? Was it really the heavy weights? Was it the supplements that you took? Was it the food? And what I mean by supplements is simple. Drugs. Drugs can give you that grainy look. Okay, and you don't have to lift heavy weights to get that grainy look. Or maybe for some people it's a combination of the actual drug, the actual training, and the actual diet. Having said that, when you look at two different bodies, one is Dorian Yates and one is Ronnie Coleman, Dorian Yates had that graininess, Ronnie Coleman did not. They both trained heavy. Ronnie probably even heavier than Dorian because he had a powerlifting background, although they were probably more or less as strong as each other. Ronnie had, at one stage, a beautiful shape, and he was lifting heavy weights, and he never had the graininess that Dorian did. So Dorian claims that graininess came from the heavy weights. Did it really? When you look at both of them and the way they trained, they certainly did go heavy in the basic movements. But when you looked at the side laterals, concentration curls, or even curl, they weren't going that excessively heavy. It was a heavy enough weight, but not excessively heavy. For myself, I remembered being really strong in arm movements, and to the point where I knew what Arnold could curl and how strong his arms were. So I went out of my way to try and emulate Arnold and be as strong as he was, which I was capable of doing. I think the strongest he ever was is he curled 280 pounds for 3 reps, which I was able to do. And I don't know how much he used on tricep exercises, but I was capable of using 3 plates on each side. So there's 60 pounds on each side, 60 kilos on each side of the bar, plus the bar. So that's 140 kilos I was able to use for repetition lying extensions. Now, my arms were not the biggest that they ever were using those weights. And in order for me to put another 2 inches on my arms, I had to train so much lighter than what I was able to lift. It wasn't even funny. So yeah, I'm curling 280 pounds, but to put the last 2 inches on, my weights were between 100 to 140 pounds. And in the style that I used, those weights were really heavy. Okay, so I used strict form, I supersetted, I squeezed, I slowed down the movement. That was significantly harder than actually lifting the heavier weight. So that gave me the size. Now, as far as this graininess, there have been times when I've had it and I didn't even know that I had it. Other people pointed it out to me. And it was mainly due to muscle fullness and how I was eating at the time. So my muscles weren't flat, they were actually hard. Right? And that was from food, the training to some extent. But I remember when I had that look, I was not training my heaviest. I was not using any sort of drug that would enhance that hardness. It was mainly from the food. So it gave me the muscle fullness. It gave me hardness in areas that I normally didn't carry that hardness. So to me, it was all about the food. Now, I've mentioned this point before. If it is all about heavy weights, what do you do with that heavy weight? Is it just a matter of holding it in a position where you've loaded the weight up and you're now holding it? Is it a matter of doing negatives with it where you're just lowering it? Do you even need the positive part? Okay, because holding heavy weights, I've noticed, does tend to help you, but what it helps you with is just handling heavy weights. It doesn't really create more development. It's almost like a circus trick where you learn to hold all these weights or lift all these weights. You've practiced it, you've gotten really good at it, but as far as development, I mean, where does it stop? Because if you continuously have to add weights, well, in order to improve, I mean, what do we do? Do we eventually get to the point where a 200-pound man is supposed to be bench pressing 1,000 pounds? It's never going to happen. So why even say that? And let's look at it critically. So I've just given you a weight which is not deemed heavy, okay? And by that, I would tend to say I've given you a weight that is 30% of your 1 rep max, okay? Now, you'll probably be able to get 30 repetitions with that or thereabouts before you reach total failure, which means once you've reached a total failure, you're struggling to get the 30th rep. You've just gotten 30 reps. Then I ask you to do a method which is called rest pause, which means you put the weight down, you take a couple of deep breaths, so you've waited anywhere from 2 to 4 seconds, you pick up the weight again, And you start pushing, and you'll find that even though you were able to do 30 repetitions with this particular weight on your first set, perhaps after a warm-up, now that I've put you in a position where you've gone to muscular failure, and I get you to pick it up again a few seconds later, this weight is now feeling really heavy. And the muscle that you're working on has no way of knowing whether that weight is 100 pounds or 400 pounds, which according to certain experts, that's the weight you've got to use in order to get that graininess or to give the muscle this particular look. Well, if I've just taken you to absolute failure and you've just picked up that weight, your muscles are contracting as hard as if the weight was 4 times heavier. So why shouldn't that weight give you that look if heavy weights are supposed to give you that look? Is it the heavy weights? Is it the food? Or is it the drugs? Right? I would say it's a combination, but when I had that look, it was most definitely the diet. Okay, and it meant I was getting enough food for the muscles to be at their strongest and be fully recovered and full of glycogen, and they would stand out in bold relief, especially if there was a low body fat level included in that. And many examples we've seen over the years of people that have this graininess and the superior definition. So it comes down to muscle hardness, muscle separation, and definition, the definition of the muscle. Now, that muscle hardness to me was always a confusing one, because as soon as somebody said to me, you're not looking hard enough, what should have happened is I should have increased my food intake or changed my supplements around, probably increased the food intake. What I actually did is dieted even further, thinking this is going to give me the muscle hardness, but it actually didn't. It gave me superior definition. It gave me superior muscle separation. And somewhere along the line, the muscle hardness was overlooked, or I did have it, instances of it, it was fleeting, and it was something that wasn't easy to control, or was it? Just by eating a particular way, that could make it very easy. Now, the other thing we have to consider, I interviewed Flavio Boccianini, and he revealed something which I could never work out. You know, I listened to Wayne DeMilia talk about the athletes and how they were collapsing from taking diuretics or certain drugs. And the way Wayne DeMilia explained it was, you know, some of their body parts would feel like concrete, which means it's muscle hardness. Now, Wayne didn't know what they were doing, or maybe he did and he didn't want to talk about it, but Flavio, on the other hand, was competing with these guys. He saw what they were doing. He was sitting at the dinner table with them. And what he saw them do is eat copious amounts of food, and with every meal that they had, they were taking a cocktail of diuretics. People were collapsing on stage. You know, Flavio had to help one of the competitors off stage because of the cocktail of diuretics that they used. Now, I'm turning the direction on this because we're talking about heavy weights, but the reason why I'm talking about heavy weights or light weights is to create a particular look. Now, this look was actually getting created by making the muscle dry, full and dry, so that the amount of food that these guys were eating, and it was not good quality food. It was high calorie foods, from what I've been told, high fat foods, so there was a lot of nutrients being crammed inside the muscle cell. And at that stage, I'm not sure if anybody was using insulin, because insulin's another one where I don't actually agree with using insulin, because I feel anything that you gain from insulin is fleeting, and it can just be lost unless you keep using insulin. So that's not something that I really recommend. However, if you know what you're doing and you're very, very flat and you're going into a contest and you You know, you need to get some carbs in there in a hurry. You know, a small dose of insulin could help, because also a small dose of insulin can dry the muscle up, because in order for insulin to be activated and work with the carbs, it will use water. So that's something that bodybuilders discovered years ago, but still I would avoid the insulin. Why? Because whatever you can do with insulin, you can do without insulin. You have your own insulin level that actually does it for you. You don't need exogenous insulin. You just don't need it. And because you actually can't hold most of the gains that you get from insulin, to me, it's not really an effective product to use, but people are using it, and all they're worried about is how good they look on stage, because it gives them a particular look. But now, that graininess is no longer there anyway, because what everybody's doing, they're just trying to get as big as possible. Right? It's a size game, to the point where they've let go of their symmetry. They're no longer worried about proportions, what the size of their waist is, how everything looks. It's a muscle game. It's a muscle size game. That's the game that they're playing at the very top echelons of bodybuilding. So if you go to the Open Mr. Olympia, it's all about muscle size. We sometimes look at really good bodybuilders of the past and say, I wonder what would happen if we put them on stage with these huge behemoths that we have today. I don't know what could happen, because if you get a good quality bodybuilder from, say, the 80s and 90s, and you were to put them in the open section of the Mr. Olympia, I would tend to think that they would win, because there's no place for them in the classic division, because they weigh too much to fit into the classic category. Yet their muscle size is contained in a manner where their waist is small, their proportions are great. You know, they have huge arms, small waistlines. They don't pack a lot of weight on their buttocks and thighs. So what do you do with that person? I would give them an automatic first, because that's the best look, and that's where I'd like to take bodybuilding back to. But there's actually no room for that person, because they don't fit into the classic category. They don't fit into the men's open category. So it's a category we've lost, which was the most beautiful category out of all of them. And it was the one which suited everybody, because you didn't have to weigh a particular weight. Everybody was on the same stage. They sometimes had an over 200 and an under 200, but the fact was everybody was on stage. Weight was irrelevant. It was a beautiful look that they were after, which could have included this graininess, which could have been built with heavy or light weights. That was all insignificant back at that stage, because you wanted a particular look. Now I see very many people in a gym that are so strong, and people want that strength, and they want to be functional. But does that get you looking the best you possibly can? No, it doesn't. Because cosmetically, it's not true, real bodybuilding that we practiced in order to create a beautiful shape, size, small waist, tapered bodies, and just a beautiful look. This muscle hardness, I would tend to say, whether you've done it with drugs or with training or with food, is not actually a healthy state to be in. You're probably your healthiest when muscles are soft and pliable and you can stretch them. Because every person that was on the verge of dying during the 90s had that look and felt like concrete. That muscle hardness, we don't know if it was a muscle spasm, but just before they were about to pass away, they all felt that concrete hardness. And who knows what it could have been, because if they were taking a cocktail of diuretics, it's really dangerous, because without mentioning too many different medications, you know, you have Lasix, which rips a lot of minerals out of your body. So if you would have mixed a Lasix with a potassium-sparing diuretic, well, one is pulling minerals out, the other one is storing minerals. You could probably take those two and they would complement each other if you were lucky. If you were unlucky and you mixed two potassium-sparing diuretics, well, then you should count your lucky stars and feel lucky that you're actually still alive and that your heart didn't stop from an overload of potassium, which is obviously what was going on, which makes me understand that whatever it is that these guys were doing with harsh medication, if they were a little bit careful and they knew a little bit more about nutrition, they could actually be loading these nutrients into the body by themselves without compromising their health as much as taking unbridled amount of cocktail diuretics, which is really, that's like a suicide trick, a diuretic cocktail. I am surprised that more bodybuilders haven't died. So a lot of the times when these people pass away and there's no way of knowing how they passed away, I would tend to say that it's very rarely from anabolic steroids, but pretty much from taking drugs that perhaps even a pensioner or a 90-year-old man could be on, but they're taking therapeutic dosages under a doctor's guidance. As soon as you hand something to a bodybuilder, you've got a person who could be on anabolic steroids, on insulin, on growth hormone, and now diuretics as well. Well, right there, you can keep it safe if you know what you're doing, but if you don't, and as you know, a lot of those pro bodybuilders didn't know what they were doing, and it wasn't until a little while ago that people stopped collapsing on stage. I'm not sure what they're doing now. These guys are making it on stage, and they're huge, they're big. I'm not sure how they're holding all that size. It's obviously with a lot of calories and whatever else is in their repertoire of supplements, training and diet. We actually don't see anymore what does a person actually eat these days. We once saw Jay Cutler having sweets. He was having a lot of sweets with Coca-Cola. Now, I'm not sure what that was about, but I didn't even see it. Somebody pointed out to me that if somebody's eating like that, well, then they've got to be using insulin along with all those sweets in order to cram all those carbs into the muscle. Does that sound healthy? Not really. Do you think you actually need insulin in order to do that? Not really. Have I used insulin? Not in competition, but I have experimented with it because of the so many questions that I get. I actually ended up using it and trying it. And I got to tell you, it's not worth it, because whatever you can do on insulin, you can do without insulin. Now, some bodybuilders recommend taking up to 80 IUs a day of insulin. Some bodybuilders believe that you should be taking a combination of slow-acting and fast-acting insulin, and that you should have all your nutrients packed into your body before you go to the gym, so you have this great workout because you've loaded the cells with carbohydrates, proteins, and other nutrients. Then there are other people that want you to take short-acting insulin all day, up to 80 IUs, which means you're hitting 20 IUs of insulin before you go into your workout. And they recommend that you do that with a lot of carbohydrates and even pre-workout. And I don't know what goes into some of the pre-workouts, okay? So that's another way of doing it, and people feel that it's completely healthy because you're using something that your body produces anyway. What I've also been led to believe with this insulin stacking is that as soon as you stop using insulin, your body automatically starts producing its own. I'm not so sure about that. I hope that's the case, because when you look at other drugs, when you stop using anabolic steroids, your own body has no production, it does not produce its own hormones anymore. You're shut down for a long time, especially if you've been a heavy user. You're shut down for a long time. When you take GH, you've shut down your own GH for a while. It comes back a lot quicker than your testosterone level does from using anabolic steroids. But with insulin, everybody seems to think that as soon as you stop it, your own insulin's going to kick back in. Now, I'm hoping that's true, because if you've gone from using 80 IUs a day of insulin to not using it at all, I would hope to God, for your own sake, that your body starts producing it again, which is what some medical experts have pointed out, but they actually have no experience. So we're back to listening to bro science bodybuilders who are not medically trained, but may know something more so. So it's not just about heavy weights, because the heavy weights is a look that you're after, and that look does not just come from heavy weights or light weights. It's a combination of training your muscles with resistance. Okay, does that resistance have to be heavy, or does it just need to feel heavy? It's a combination of supplements and egogenics, and it's a combination of food and how much food, carbohydrates, fats, sodium and potassium you should store within that muscle to give it that look. So these are all the things that need to be taken into consideration. It's not just heavy weights. It never has been. If you like it, share it.